Why do the worst people seem to succeed? Nietzsche and the truth about power. Welcome to Psych Secrets. At Psych Secrets, we uncover the hidden forces that shape human behavior, influence power dynamics, and drive success. Using research-backed insights from psychology, philosophy, and history, we break down complex ideas into practical lessons. If you've ever wondered why some people seem to rise to the top despite their flaws, or how you can master power without losing yourself, you're in the right place. The psychology of power. Why the Ruthless Rise psychologists have extensively studied how power changes people. When individuals gain power, three major psychological shifts often occur. Overconfidence bias, Dunning-Kruger effect. Power can make people overestimate their intelligence and competence. This was demonstrated in studies where individuals in leadership positions exhibited inflated self-perceptions despite making poor decisions. The more power people accumulate, the less they recognize their own limitations. Example: the illusion of superiority. A study by Dunning and Kruger, 1999, found that individuals who performed poorly on cognitive tasks were more likely to overestimate their competence. This effect is magnified in high-status individuals who rarely face genuine criticism. Folklore example: the tale of the arrogant king. Many traditional stories feature kings who believe themselves invincible, only to be undone by their own hubris. The tale of King Midas, who wished that everything he touched turned to gold, is a cautionary example of how unchecked confidence can lead to destruction. Empathy decline, power paradox. As power increases, people become less sensitive to others' emotions and perspectives. Research by Keltner et al., 2003, showed that individuals in positions of power exhibited diminished mirror neuron activity, meaning they were less likely to empathize with others. Example: the Stanford Prison Experiment, Zimbardo, 1971. This study showed how ordinary college students, when placed in roles of authority, quickly became emotionally detached and abusive toward their peers who played prisoners. The loss of empathy was not due to inherent cruelty, but the psychological effects of power itself. Folklore example: the merchant and the beggar. A common story in many cultures tells of a rich merchant who once was poor, but after gaining wealth, refuses to help those in need. His downfall comes when he loses everything and experiences the same suffering he ignored in others. Riskier decision-making, hubris syndrome. Those in power often make impulsive and overconfident choices, leading to dramatic rises and falls. Power affects the brain's dopamine system, making leaders more likely to seek rewards and take excessive risks. Example: the fall of Napoleon Bonaparte. Initially a strategic genius, Napoleon's eventual defeat was due to his overreach, particularly in the Russian campaign. His belief in his own invincibility led to reckless decision-making and ultimate downfall. Folklore example: Icarus and the sun. In Greek mythology, Icarus ignores warnings and flies too close to the sun, leading to his demise. This mirrors how powerful individuals often disregard caution, believing themselves above failure. However, power doesn't always corrupt. What matters is how it is obtained and managed. Ethical leadership requires self-awareness, strategic empathy, and emotional regulation. To illustrate these ideas, let's look at real-world psychological experiments and historical examples that reveal the underlying nature of power. Psychologists have extensively studied how power changes people. When individuals gain power, three major psychological shifts often occur. Overconfidence bias, Dunning-Kruger effect. Power can make people overestimate their intelligence and competence. Empathy decline, power paradox. As power increases, people become less sensitive to others' emotions and perspectives. Riskier decision-making, hubris syndrome. Those in power often make impulsive and overconfident choices, leading to dramatic rises and falls. However, power doesn't always corrupt. What matters is how it is obtained and managed. Ethical leadership requires self-awareness, strategic empathy, and emotional regulation. To illustrate these ideas, let's look at real-world psychological experiments and historical examples that reveal the underlying nature of power. The Stanford Prison Experiment: How Power Corrupts. In 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo conducted the famous Stanford Prison Experiment to examine how people behave in positions of authority. College students were randomly assigned roles as either guards or prisoners in a simulated prison setting. Within 2 days, the guards became excessively authoritarian, humiliating, and psychologically tormenting the prisoners. The study, meant to last 2 weeks, was shut down after only 6 days due to extreme emotional distress. Psychological insight. Power can rapidly dehumanize individuals, leading them to engage in behaviors they would never consider otherwise. The guards were not inherently cruel, yet the structure of power turned them into oppressors. The more unchecked and unregulated power becomes, the greater the moral blindness that follows. Without accountability, power transforms from leadership into domination. Modern parallels. Workplace hierarchies where managers exploit their authority, creating toxic environments where employees fear retaliation. Political leaders who enter office with good intentions but gradually become detached from the realities of those they govern, justifying corruption and authoritarian practices. Online anonymity and social media mob mentality, where individuals, feeling empowered by a lack of accountability, engage in cyberbullying or harassment they would never commit in person. Folktale analogy, the farmer and the Lord. An old folktale tells of a humble farmer who is granted unlimited authority over his village for a year. Initially, he rules with fairness, but as time passes, he begins to demand more from his neighbors, believing they owe him respect. By the end of the year, he has taxed them into poverty and ignored their suffering. When the year is up, he is stripped of his power and realizes too late the damage he has caused. This mirrors how power can erode one's morality if left unchecked. Lesson for leadership. Power must be balanced with accountability and ethical reflection. Without external checks, even the well-intentioned can become authoritarian. Leaders must actively resist the temptation of absolute control and remain self-aware. Those in power should regularly question their decisions, seek criticism, and cultivate humility to prevent moral decay. The Stanford Prison Experiment serves as a stark reminder. The problem isn't just the people in power, it's the system that allows unchecked power to exist. The Stanford Prison Experiment, How Power Corrupts. In 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo conducted the famous Stanford Prison Experiment to examine how people behave in positions of authority. College students were randomly assigned roles as either guards or prisoners in a simulated prison setting. Within 2 days, the guards became excessively authoritarian, humiliating and psychologically tormenting the prisoners. The study, meant to last 2 weeks, was shut down after only 6 days due to extreme emotional distress. Psychological insight. Power can rapidly dehumanize individuals, leading them to engage in behaviors they would never consider otherwise. The more unchecked and unregulated power becomes, the greater the moral blindness that follows. Modern parallels. Workplace hierarchies where bosses abuse their authority and employees feel powerless. Political leaders who, once elected, begin operating under different moral guidelines. Lesson for leadership. Power must be balanced with accountability and ethical reflection. Leaders must actively resist the temptation of absolute control and remain self-aware. Nietzsche, Oppenheimer, and the Manhattan Project. The weight of power. J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, faced an ethical crisis after his work on the Manhattan Project led to one of the deadliest weapons in history. After witnessing the first nuclear test, he famously quoted the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Despite his contributions to science, Oppenheimer later opposed nuclear proliferation, which ultimately led to his political downfall as he was stripped of his security clearance. Psychological insight. Moral injury. A deep psychological wound caused when one's actions conflict with personal morals. Oppenheimer was haunted by the devastating potential of his creation, much like soldiers who experience PTSD after actions that conflict with their ethical beliefs. Cognitive dissonance, the tension experienced when actions contradict long-held beliefs and values. Oppenheimer, once a passionate scientist seeking progress, struggled with the knowledge that his work had led to mass destruction. Scientific parallels. The Milgram experiment, 1961. Psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted an experiment to test obedience to authority. Participants were instructed to administer what they believed were painful electric shocks to another person. Despite hearing screams of pain, many continued under the orders of an authority figure. This mirrors Oppenheimer's dilemma. Scientists often pursue knowledge, sometimes without fully considering the consequences, only to later grapple with their moral responsibility. Similar situations in everyday life. The corporate dilemma. A successful entrepreneur who sacrifices personal values for profit only to feel unfulfilled. Consider a CEO who builds a billion-dollar company by exploiting labor, then later regrets the harm caused to workers. The political corruption trap. A politician who starts out with noble intentions but is gradually consumed by the system, compromising values for political survival. History is filled with figures who once promised reform but later became part of the very system they opposed. Folklore example. The blacksmith and the devil. A village blacksmith, eager to craft the greatest weapon, makes a deal with the devil to forge an invincible sword. The sword is flawless, but over time, it brings destruction to everything he loves. In the end, he realizes that his greatest achievement was also his greatest curse. Like Oppenheimer, he learns that power without ethical foresight leads to ruin. Lesson for power seekers. Great influence requires deep self-reflection. Those in powerful positions must constantly evaluate the long-term consequences of their actions. Success without moral alignment leads to psychological distress and regret. True leadership isn't just about achieving greatness. It's about ensuring that greatness serves a purpose beyond personal ambition. Oppenheimer's story serves as a powerful warning. Power must be pursued with responsibility, or it will ultimately become a burden. Oppenheimer and the Manhattan Project. The weight of power. J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, faced an ethical crisis after his work on the Manhattan Project led to one of the deadliest weapons in history. After witnessing the first nuclear test, he famously quoted the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Despite his contributions to science, Oppenheimer later opposed nuclear proliferation, which ultimately led to his political downfall as he was stripped of his security clearance. Psychological insight. Moral injury. A deep psychological wound caused when one's actions conflict with personal morals. Cognitive dissonance. The tension experienced when actions contradict long-held beliefs and values. Similar situations in everyday life. A successful entrepreneur who sacrifices personal values for profit only to feel unfulfilled. A politician who starts out with noble intentions but is gradually consumed by system. Lesson for power seekers. Great influence requires deep self-reflection. Success without moral alignment leads to psychological distress and regret. The fall of WeWork, the illusion of invincibility. Adam Neumann, the charismatic CEO of WeWork, built a startup valued at $47 billion, only to see it collapse spectacularly. His reckless expansion, extravagant spending, and delusional belief in his own invulnerability led to the company's near bankruptcy. Investors forced him out, and the company's value plummeted. Psychological insight, hubris syndrome, when leaders become excessively confident, ignore criticism, and take reckless risks. Newman's unchecked self-assurance led him to make business decisions based on vision rather than sustainability. The charismatic trap. Charisma can mislead investors and employees, making a company look stronger than it actually is. However, without solid fundamentals, an empire built on personality alone will eventually collapse. Scientific parallels, the illusion of control experiment, Langer 1975. Psychologist Ellen Langer found that individuals often overestimate their ability to control outcomes, even in situations governed by chance. This mirrors Newman's belief that sheer confidence and vision could override financial realities. Everyday parallels. Overconfident entrepreneurs, business owners who expand too quickly, ignoring financial risks until their company collapses. Political leaders in denial. Overconfident politicians who believe they are untouchable, only to be undone by scandals or economic failures. The overleveraged investor. Those who take excessive financial risks, convinced they can outsmart the market, only to suffer massive losses. Folklore example, the golden goose. A farmer discovers a goose that lays golden eggs. Instead of being patient, he becomes greedy and kills the goose, believing he will find a stash of gold inside. He ends up with nothing. Like Newman, he destroys the source of his success by prioritizing short-term gains over long-term stability. Lesson in leadership. Confidence must be balanced with strategic planning. Vision alone is not enough. Leaders must remain grounded in reality. Surround yourself with advisors who challenge assumptions. Leaders who refuse to listen to dissenting voices often find themselves in echo chambers that reinforce their worst instincts. Sustainable success is built on fundamentals, not hype. The best leaders understand that charisma can open doors, but strategy and execution keep them open. The WeWork story serves as a cautionary tale. Hubris may get you to the top, but only wisdom keeps you there. The fall of WeWork, the illusion of invincibility. Adam Neumann, the charismatic CEO of WeWork, built a startup valued at $47 billion, only to see it collapse spectacularly. His reckless expansion, extravagant spending, and delusional belief in his own invulnerability led to the company's near bankruptcy. Investors forced him out, and the company's value plummeted. Psychological insight. Hubris syndrome. When leaders become excessively confident, ignore criticism, and take reckless risks. Charisma can mislead investors and employees but lacks sustainability without solid fundamentals. Everyday parallels. Business owners who grow too fast, ignoring risks until their company collapses. Overconfident politicians who believe they are untouchable, only to face scandals that ruin them. Lesson in leadership. Confidence must be balanced with strategic planning. Surround yourself with advisors who challenge assumptions. Folk wisdom and power, lessons from folklore, the tale of the frog and the scorpion. A scorpion asks a frog to carry him across the river. The frog hesitates, fearing the scorpion will sting him. The scorpion reassures him, saying, "If I sting you, we'll both drown." Halfway across, the scorpion stings the frog. As they sink, the frog asks, "Why did you do it?" The scorpion replies, "It's in my nature." Moral: power-hungry individuals often act destructively, even when it's against their long-term interests. The emperor's new clothes. A vain emperor is tricked into wearing invisible clothes that only the wise can see. His advisors, afraid of contradicting him, praise his outfit, until a child shouts, "The emperor has no clothes." Moral: when power is built on illusion, it eventually collapses under the weight of reality. How to master power without losing yourself. Navigating a world where power often rewards the ruthless requires a balance of ambition, awareness, and ethics. Many people assume that the only way to rise is through manipulation and self-interest, but psychological research suggests that sustainable power comes from a combination of strategic thinking, emotional intelligence, and ethical leadership. 1. Develop self-awareness and emotional intelligence. Self-awareness is the foundation of ethical leadership. Those who fail to examine their own motives often fall into the same traps of hubris and moral corruption that have doomed leaders throughout history. Reflect on your true motivations for seeking power. Are you driven by the desire for control, or do you seek to create meaningful change? Surround yourself with people who will hold you accountable. Studies in psychology, such as those by Tasha Eurich, 2010, show that most people overestimate their self-awareness. Regular feedback from trusted advisors is essential for keeping your ego in check. 2. Balance vision with practicality. Dreaming big is necessary for leadership, but unchecked ambition without realistic planning is a recipe for failure. Dream big, but stay grounded in reality. The downfall of many leaders stems from ignoring practical limitations. Research on motivational theory, Locke and Latham, 1990, emphasizes that goals should be both ambitious and attainable. Avoid overconfidence. Always test your assumptions. The Dunning-Kruger effect demonstrates how people with limited knowledge often overestimate their expertise. Wise leaders continuously challenge their own ideas and adjust course when needed. Top 3. Cultivate strategic empathy. Empathy is often seen as a weakness in competitive environments, but in reality, it is a powerful tool for influence and leadership. Learn to read people's motivations. Psychologists like Paul Ekman have demonstrated that microexpressions and behavioral cues can reveal underlying emotions. The ability to interpret these cues allows leaders to anticipate reactions and respond effectively. Influence others ethically, not manipulatively. Persuasion research by Robert Cialdini, 2001, highlights how ethical influence is far more sustainable than coercion or deceit. The most successful leaders build trust-based authority rather than ruling through fear. 4. Redefine success beyond power. One of the biggest misconceptions about power is that it is an end goal. In reality, power is just a tool. Its true value depends on how it is used. Power is not the ultimate goal. Impact is. The leaders who leave a lasting legacy are those who use power to serve a greater purpose. Figures like Nelson Mandela demonstrated that true leadership is about transformation, not domination. Ask yourself, how will I be remembered? Many leaders chase power only to find themselves unfulfilled once they achieve it. Studies in positive psychology, Seligman 2002, show that meaning and contribution lead to greater life satisfaction than status alone. By mastering power without losing yourself, you not only ensure your success, but also create a lasting impact that extends beyond your personal ambition. True power is not about control. It's about the ability to shape a better future. Final thought: power is a tool, not an identity. Nietzsche believed power itself is neither good nor evil. It is simply a force of nature. But history and psychology tell us that power, when unchecked, has the ability to consume even the most well-intentioned individuals. Instead of asking, "Should I seek power?" ask yourself, "How can I use power to create something greater than myself?" True mastery of power requires wisdom, restraint, and self-awareness. The most successful and respected leaders understand that power is not about domination, but about responsibility and impact. Psychological insight: the paradox of power. Research by Dr. Keltner, 2007, suggests that power can either elevate moral responsibility or erode empathy, depending on the individual's mindset and self-regulation. Studies on transformational leadership, BASE 1990, show that leaders who use power to empower others rather than control them are more likely to leave a lasting legacy. Historical parallel: the rise and fall of Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was a master strategist and leader who used power to reshape Rome. However, his failure to balance personal ambition with collective governance led to his downfall. His assassination was not just the result of political betrayal. It was the consequence of unchecked authority that made his peers feel expendable. His story is a reminder that power without foresight and humility often ends in collapse. Folklore example: the wise king and the cursed crown. A wise king was given a crown that granted absolute power, but it came with a curse. Every ruler who wore it for too long became blind to their own flaws. The king, realizing the danger, chose to remove the crown frequently and listen to the counsel of his people. Unlike past rulers, he remained just and ruled wisely. His legacy endured, proving that the wisest leaders are those who do not let power define them. Final reflection: power should be a means, not an end. Those who seek power for its own sake often lose themselves in the process. The most enduring leaders wield power with intentionality, not impulse. They create, inspire, and transform rather than merely accumulate control. True mastery of power lies in knowing when to use it and when to step back. The choice is yours. Will you master power, or will power master you?